Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving deep into one of the world's most incredible epics, the Ramayana. But here's the thing. We're not just going to retell the story you think you know. We are going to unpack three powerful and honestly surprisingly different ways of looking at it that show just how much is going on beneath the surface. Okay, let's jump right in with this quote because it perfectly sets the stage. It frames the entire epic as something deeply personal, a story about choice. You see, both Ram and his arch-nemesis Ravana share that first syllable, Ra. The idea here is that the path we take in life, the person we become, depends entirely on the choice we make next.
So this brings us to our first perspective, which is probably the one you're most familiar with. The Ramayana as a kind of moral compass. A guide to living a good life, where the hero, Ram, shows us the ideal path, a path that's all about duty and principle.
Ram is famously called Maryada Purushottam. Now, this isn't just a fancy title. Let's break it down. Maryada means limits, and Purushottam means the best, or ultimate man. So he's considered the perfect man, not because he's all-powerful, but because he understands his boundaries and operates perfectly within the code of Dharma, or what you might call righteous duty. And this is the absolute best example of that. I mean, think about it. Ram could have fought for the throne. He was the eldest son. It was totally his right. But instead, just to make sure his father's promise was kept, he accepted 14 years of exile in a forest. No hesitation. He chose principle over power, a decision that couldn't be more different from his rival, Ravana. And this slide right here, it shows you exactly how that plays out. The whole war, the entire epic, really pivots on the loyalty of brothers. Ram was able to face this impossible army because his brother, Lakshman, was his rock, totally unshakable. Ravana, on the other hand, with all his power and wealth, was ultimately defeated because his own ego and his unrighteous actions drove his own brother, Vibhishan, to leave his side. It all comes back to the choices they made.
Okay, so that moral framework is powerful, for sure. But it is not the only way to read this story. Let's shift gears and focus on another key figure, because when we do, a totally different picture emerges. If we look really closely at the original text by the sage Valmiki, we get a very, very different portrait of Sita. Just think for a second about how Sita is usually portrayed. She's passive, she's gentle, the classic damsel in distress just waiting for a hero to come rescue her. But is that who she really was? What does the actual source text, the Valmiki Ramayana, tell us about her?
Let's just park on this slide for a second, because this is wild. A lot of the most famous parts of Sita's story, like the Lakshman Rekha, that protective line, it's not in the original text at all. It was added centuries later. In Valmiki's version, she wasn't forced into exile. She basically demanded to go with Ram. And that heartbreaking story of her banishment over some gossip, also from a later text. The original epic ends on a high note, with Ram and Sita coming back to Ayodhya to rule together. And get this, far from being some helpless victim, Valmiki Sita is fierce. When Ravana has her captured, she doesn't just sit there and weep. No way. She looks the most powerful king in the world right in the eye and just unleashes on him. She calls him a jackal and herself a lioness. I mean, come on, that is not the voice of a victim.
Now this brings us to one of the most controversial and honestly most misunderstood moments in the entire epic, the trial by fire. The popular version goes that a suspicious Ram forced Sita to walk through fire to prove her purity. But again, the original text tells a very, very different story.
So, here's the crucial thing to understand. This wasn't a personal test of Sita's virtue. Ram knew she was pure. This whole thing was a brilliant piece of political theater. He played the part of the doubting husband to say the ugliest possible rumors out loud, which then forced everyone, the gods, the army, the public, to jump to her defense. When she emerges from the fire unharmed, he wasn't testing her, he was cementing her status as a totally blameless queen in front of his entire kingdom, silencing any gossip forever. Pretty clever, right?
All right, let's move on to our third perspective. And I gotta tell you, this one might be the most mind-bending of all. This interpretation completely reframes the entire epic, suggesting it's not actually Ram's story, the Ramayana, at all.
What if Sita wasn't just a character in the story, but the actual architect of the whole thing? This theory flips the script completely and suggests that she was the one pulling all the strings, masterfully guiding the hero toward his destiny.
Okay, so this timeline lays out the logic, and it's brilliant. Ravana had a boon that meant no god or demon could kill him, but it had a loophole, an ordinary man could. So, the god Vishnu had to be born as Ram, with no memory of his divine powers. But his consort, the goddess Lakshmi, was born as Sita, and in this version, she remembers everything. She knows the entire plan, and her job is to make sure this ordinary Ram ends up in exactly the right place at the right time to save the world.
So if you look at it this way, all these events that seem like tragedies are actually calculated chess moves. Of course, a woman who could lift the divine bow of Shiva as a child knew the golden deer wasn't real. She sent Ram away on purpose. She insulted Lakshman to make him leave her alone. Why? So Ravana could abduct her. It was the only way to get the ordinary man Ram to cross an ocean and fight a war he never would have otherwise. She was the divine strategist making it all happen.
So, we have these three very different ways of seeing the story. But you know what's interesting? No matter which version you look at, one central theme is always there, this internal battle between good and evil, perfectly symbolized by Ram and Ravana.
It's so easy to just see Ravana as this one-dimensional villain, but he was so much more complex. He was a brilliant scholar, a huge devotee of the god Shiva, a descendant of the creator god Brahma himself. He had immense divine potential. His name literally tells the story, part demon, part god. His downfall wasn't that he wasn't divine enough. It was that he let his ego, his demonic side, take over and consume him.
So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? I think the most crucial point is that the Ramayana isn't just one single story set in stone. It's a living, breathing epic with so many layers of meaning.
So first, you can absolutely read it as a guide to life. A story about making the right choices, about doing your duty even when it's hard, and about what happens when you let your ego run the show. Then you can see it as the story of an unbelievably strong and resilient woman, not a victim, but a victor. Someone whose intelligence, courage, and integrity just shine, even in the absolute darkest of times.
And third, you can see it as this grand cosmic divine play, a drama where an all-knowing goddess is masterfully moving the pieces on the board to bring balance back to the universe, proving that even a seemingly ordinary person can defeat the greatest evil if they're guided by a divine purpose.
And that, ultimately, is where the epic's real power lies. It can be all of these things at once. It's a moral guide, a hero's journey, a feminist text, and a divine mystery. So the real question isn't about which version is the correct one. It's about which of its many truths speaks most deeply to you.